So we've chosen our yeast. I've already made our little starter culture. So, and I've started adding a little bit of juice. I think it's about time to add a little bit more juice. Like I explained in the first video, you start at a temperature of around 30 degrees, right? On the back of these packets, or the front in this case, it'll have little directions for you, right? So, so it'll have, you know, let's see here, you know, how much water to use, what temperature, how long, when to add the yeast in, how much to add. Typically these 5-gram sachets are good for 20 to 30 liters of juice. So we're obviously going to use a little bit less, considering we only have 2 liters like we did before. So add a little bit more juice. Already making a mess. Here we go. And like before, I've got the same blend of Capella and Co-op apple juice, and we're going to see how it tastes different from the baker's yeast, right? So it's always good to have a kind of a constant when you're experimenting. So this will be a constant in this case. So give that a stir. Right. So that is our yeast selection. Now we're going to prep our cider. So we've got our handy 2-liter jug. We're gonna pour it in. Ooh, nice and cloudy. Got all the chunks in there. Right, this is much clearer, not cloudy, but just as good. Right, so we've got our juice here. Now we're going to talk measurements. Okay, so when you make cider, it's very, very useful to take measurements, and that helps us to kind of make sure we know what's going on in our cider, like what is in there. We're going to find out. And then the other thing it does is it allows us to be more consistent in the products that we make. So when you're making lots of cider, it's really useful to know how much sugar is at the beginning and at the end, right? It's really useful to know what acidity is, so you know that if it's too sharp, you can kind of blend it back to make sure it's a little more balanced, right? So all these different things is what we're going to talk about now. So the first measurement that we're going to talk about is specific gravity. And specific gravity is all about the sugar when it comes to cider. So specific gravity measures the density of a liquid in comparison to water, which is 0. So the scale goes from 0. Now, to measure specific gravity, we use something called a hydrometer. They usually come in a little tube like this. We've wrapped some bubble wrap around it to keep it safe. So you have a weight at the bottom here. That's the correct weight to kind of counteract what water would normally be. And you've got here a scale, right? So hydrometers come in different scales. Some of them are very useful for the beginning, for a very dense liquid like juice. It's full of sugar. So this one is 0.99 to 1.02. And the other one we have, this is usually used, for the finishing of the cider. Then we have a hydrometer that's got a little bit higher of a scale, which is better for a high density liquid. And this goes from 1.02, where the other one left off, to 1.07, right? In this juice, we're probably looking at somewhere around 1.055 to 1.06, but we're going to see in a second. So it's very simple to use a hydrometer. So basically, if you have access to a cylinder like this, great. If not, it works just as well in a larger vessel like this. We only use this so when we take samples, we don't need to use as much. You can also give it a go in your vessel as well, whatever works for you. But I'm going to use my cylinder. I'm going to pour the juice in, and I'm going to pour it almost to the top, not quite, right? That looks good. That looks good. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take our higher scale hydrometer here, and we're going to rest it on the top of the liquid here, give it a spin, and while you're spinning it, let go. Now this makes sure that the hydrometer doesn't get stuck to the sides, and so that we can see what's going on. So what we're going to look at here is where the meniscus, right? Where the liquid is in relation. So we're hovering at about, oh, come on, spin back around. So as you can see, 1.03, 1.04. Now we go down a few ticks. It looks like we're at about 1.047. We're gonna go over to our handy dandy record keeper, right? So I've just made this one up. So we have our batch name, when we pitch the yeast, which juices and apples did we use, volume, starting gravity, final gravity. So this is our specific gravity, just at the beginning and at the end of the fermentation, because we will change. We'll get into why that's useful in a bit. So batch name, oh no, I'm no good at coming up with names. Why don't we call it Max's Special Blend Volume 2. How about that? Because we've already done one volume. Juices apple used, we used Co-op plus Capella. Our volume is about 2 liters. And that's at the beginning, right? Our initial volume. That will change again after we rack, like you saw in a previous video. Our starting gravity is 1.047, right? So it's always good to keep good notes. Now that we've measured our specific gravity, we can take this out, set it somewhere on a little towel so it doesn't drip liquid everywhere. And let's clear our workstation a little bit. So we've measured our specific gravity. Now, I don't have what I need to measure the acidity here. But the other measurements I'll just kind of talk about briefly. So the other thing that we're going to measure is the acid, right? And in apples, it's the malic acid that we want to know, right? But there are 2 different methods for measuring acidity, and they both tell us something kind of different. So the pH, right, the potential hydrogen, is how we tell how safe a cider will be. It's typically cider juice will come in at a pH of between 3 and 4, right? You want to be on the lower end of the scale because that stops dangerous and bad microbes from getting in and ruining your cider, right? So 3.2, 3.3 is a pretty good place to be for pH. If you're anywhere above 3.5, you're going to want to think about maybe adding a little bit more acid, or at the end, make sure that you add some sulfites in the form of usually Camden tablets is what you can find, just to make sure your cider is safe. So the other measurement of acidity is the titratable acidity. Now this is measured using a little bit more equipment that I don't have here, and you probably don't have at home. It's not strictly necessary, but the titratable acidity measures, like I said, the malic acid in there, the apple acid. And this is going to tell us more how much acid is perceived, right? So this measurement is much more linked with how much acid can the palate feel, essentially. And so this gives us a better estimate of kind of what our cider will taste like, versus the pH that tells us more about the safety of our cider. The last thing I kind of want to get into with you at this point is why we measure specific gravity at the beginning and at the end. We measure specific gravity at the beginning to know how much sugar we start with, and we measure it at the end to know that it's finished fermenting, that there's no more sugar left, right? So we should have a specific gravity of around 0 or even below, because alcohol is less dense than water. Your levels can go below to 0.995 occasionally. So essentially what we do is we take our starting gravity, and then we have a nice little conversion, so we know where we end. If we end at 0, we know that we started with 47, so what does 47 equate into in terms of specific gravity? I'll let you guys know later what that ends up being. We're going to add our juice into the vessel. This time I'm using a old milk carton. It's not as clear as the other one, but that's okay. It's not fully opaque, so we can get away with it. I just want to show what different kind of vessels you can use. It's really up to you, but something kind of see-through, obviously, so we can see what's happening is good. So we have our, so we have a bit here, but we're going to add quite a bit of our yeast starter here. So we're going to kind of take a little bit out. We can always top it up a little bit, just to make sure that we have enough space for our culture. So we are going to pour gently over our tray again. So stir it up and pitch it in. All right, and now we have a little bit of space left, not too much. Again, we want to leave a little, like about 1.5 inches of head space. All right, so there we go. We have a nice little bung which fits in the milk carton, thankfully, and our airlock, right? We put a little bit of water in there to make sure that the CO2 gas can release, but nothing can get in. So we have round number 2. It's great chatting with you guys, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.